Hey everybody, Matthew here from MiniWargaming.com, and it's time for another Sit and Talk. Now this is the first one done in the new format, and the new format is as such. We are going to be covering one specific topic that you can ask any question related to that you want. We're still going to have the occasional Sit and Talk, probably once a month, where it's just grabbing random comments, but I'll always warn you at the beginning of a Sit and Talk what the next Sit and Talk is going to be all about, whether it's a specific topic or random. So when it's a specific topic like today, which is about narrative campaigns, I'm going to answer any question that was asked about narrative campaigns, then make sure that you leave questions specifically for that topic. Now, I don't want you to leave questions about narrative campaigns because that's not next week's topic. I'll be ignoring any of the comments or questions that don't specifically address the topic that I tell you the next one will be. I went through and actually deleted out all the comments that weren't narrative campaign stuff. Now, that doesn't mean I don't want you to leave comments that reply to what I say, because I actually do read all of them. I went through 11 pages of comments and I deleted all the ones that weren't narrative campaign ones, but I did read them because, for example, I know the last one that we did a couple weeks ago covered a rather sensitive subject. And I just want to say, before I start, I just want to say a big thank you, because I believe as much as there was both good and bad comments being posted, overall I felt a very positive response, that most people took it in a good way, even those who disagreed. So thank you very much. I know there was many who disagreed, and that's perfectly fine. And maybe there were some who disagreed a little too harshly, but I totally expected that and just knew that that would happen. But we're not going to be covering that subject today. Today is about narrative campaigns, but next week's topic is going to be about rules. And that means you can ask any question that has to do with anything about rules. And this could be in any army. I mainly play 40K. So I guess I should specify Warhammer 40K rules, because as much as I know Infinity and War Machine and fantasy and that kind of stuff, well, not really fantasy anymore because I haven't played Age of Sigmar yet. I'm very rusty on War Machine. Infinity's come out with a new edition, and Fantasy's come out with their new edition, Age of Sigmar, as well. And so I'm just not going to know those rules. So 40K rules. Ask me any question, even if it's a basic question. I'll have my iPad handy and rule books handy. If it's a debatable one, then I will look up stuff and I'll just kind of like explore what the possible answers can be. Even if it's a rehash ones from before, that's perfectly fine. And so this is still an experiment because, for example, once I deleted everything that wasn't on topic, I only have about 4 pages of comments. And so I'm curious as how long this will take. I'm still going to cap it at 45 minutes and then try to have another 30 minutes for the vault segment. But we'll just have to kind of see how that works out. So next week's subject, and there's one more thing. Next week's subject is 40K rules. And if you want a topic to be covered, I'm going to be creating a separate video that's going to kind of be the evergreen thing for posting topic suggestions. There will be a link in the video description below that will take you to that video. And that video will just be basically me saying, hey, leave a topic below and thumb up ones that you want. And I'm going to, on that video, I'm going to update the video description to cover topics that we've already covered and give links to the Sit and Talks where those are, and I'll delete the comments that cover those topics. So like, for example, if somebody says, talk about Age of Sigmar, and that gets thumbed up 100 times, and then I do an Age of Sigmar one, then I'll post in the video description that I did an Age of Sigmar one, and I'll delete the Age of Sigmar topic suggestion because it's no longer relevant, so you can just thumb up other ones. So I'm not deleting it because I don't want to do it. I'll delete it because I did it. And so if you want to leave a topic suggestion, which I'd love for you to do, or I'd love for you to go and vote on topic suggestions that other people want me to do, then there will be a link in the video description below. So don't leave that in the comments. Leave that in the link in the video description below. So let's recap. Next week's subject, 40K rules. You want a question covered in there, leave a comment in the comment section below. Unless you're watching this on YouTube, then click the link and leave it on our website like normal. Thumb up the ones that you want to be answered the most. And if you'd like to suggest a topic or vote on the next topic, there will be a link in the video description below to go and do that. Whew, that's a long intro, and once we kind of get the flow of this, we'll be able to shorten that to less than 4.5 minutes. So let's just get right into the questions. So JG Ponage says, would you consider adding in a Necromunda element to a narrative campaign? In other words, when you're fighting in a hive world. The answer to that is a simple yes. I would definitely consider that. I know the next question from Moonin or Munnin, asks a similar thing per using like a Battlefleet Gothic, or actually it says Necromunda as well. So there's two similar questions there. I would definitely consider doing that. We've thought about doing it before. For example, the Battlefleet Gothic one seems like the obvious precursor. There's the fighting in space, that then you reach the planet, or heck, there could be fighting on the planet and fighting in space at the same time. We definitely have considered that. We're not going to be doing it in the next couple narrative campaigns, but it's something that is definitely on my mind for a way to kind of change things up. I don't think we've exhausted doing it the way we're doing it yet, but I do feel that eventually we're going to want to be adding in these new elements. And Necromunda would be fun. I'm not sure if it would be Necromunda that we would do necessarily, because Necromunda is like really small scale, but yeah, that could be a lot of fun to kind of to change that around. So yeah, definitely would want to try. In my mind, this Battlefleet Gothic is the big one to think about. There's possibilities for things like Epic as well, for portraying larger battles. But narrative campaigns, they are about the large fights, but they're really, I think the thing that makes them the most interesting is the characters that get created and developed. And not necessarily created by me, but kind of created by the dice. The most interesting characters are the ones that were unplanned. So it's a fine balance between creating a campaign that focuses on those characters and one that gives a really cool overall story. And not every story needs to be epic. Like, not every story has to be about a full-scale invasion or anything else like that. In fact, I remember when I was at Warhammer World and I was looking at their displays, and some of their displays were just like a massive fortress under siege. I thought, wouldn't it be cool to do an entire narrative campaign which is just the siege of that particular fortress? And so you could have all sorts of missions that deal with, infiltrating in, or the main frontal assault, or things coming in from the sky, or the fight above the fortress in the sky. All these different things could create a really neat element in the narrative campaign as well, all focused around just one big fight. So it's kind of like one large apocalypse game for the entire narrative campaign, except that it focuses on different areas of it. And so it doesn't have to be planet-wide or multi-planet-wide. It really can be any scale, and it's just, as long as you make the battle reports right in such a way that they don't kind of force you to do things in a way that doesn't work. For example, there's ways to do that which we can talk about on this. I think we'll have some questions that'll cover that. But yeah, it can be any scale, and so things like Battlefleet Gothic, Necromunda, it's really an epic could be incorporated into it. It's just, as long as I believe that the main thing that people really like about it is the story element of it. I know that's the biggest complaint we've had for Warzone Apothis, is there's not enough story, and the kind of the character aspect as well. You kind of fall in love with those characters and you really care about the story, and so that's what really drives it. Because other than that, they're just normal battle reports with some special rules. So why would people like them so much more if it wasn't for the fact that they can invest themselves in it because of the story? Death Jester 30 is one of the planet's missions from the board for Warzone Apothis. That's what it looks like. Is one of the planet's mission from the board for Warzone Apothis. That's what it looks like. I'm not sure I understand your question, Death Jester. It's one of the planet's mission from the board for Warzone Apothis. That's what it looks like. I actually not quite sure what that question means, so I apologize. I have to move on from that one. Anrel, hey Matt, 2 questions. Greedy, I know. Firstly, what has been your favorite mini wargaming narrative campaign, and why? That's a good question. Trying to think. It's hard because when you're creating them, you're in them. You don't really. It's much more fun to watch than be watched, I guess is what I'm trying to say. The creating them is hard. It's a lot of work, and you invest a lot into them, and so you're kind of waiting to see what the audience will say as you create those. I would say. Okay, let me list a few of the favorites, and I'll try to narrow it down. Fate of Fayoum, the very first one. Utgard Infestation. Rise of the Blood, like these other ones were good. Like I enjoyed Rise of the Blood Reaver. I know there's the World Engine. That's probably my least favorite. I know it was still actually quite popular, but I really disliked how the story went and how it kind of developed. I'd say out of all of them, the Utgard Infestation was my best work.
Yes!
Oh, jeez, you scared me. It felt, I think there was a bunch of elements. It was still hard to create, but I felt that the characters were interesting and that kind of got developed. Nothing was really, well, not a lot was forced. And I don't mean like fudge dice rolls. I mean like, I get certain ideas in my mind of where the story should go. And sometimes I kind of just push that into it, even if it doesn't quite fit with the way the battle reports have kind of shown. And Utgard Infestation felt pretty organic, like it grew the way it should. And so there was a lot of interesting things that happened there. We had a lot of cool, like I essentially created a Gene Stealer Codex, Gene Stealer Cult Codex, which I really enjoyed doing, kind of creating. I didn't play Tyranids. I totally played a Gene Stealer Cult. There was some missions where it was Tyranids versus Sisters of Battle, but for the most part, it actually felt like a Gene Stealer Cult. You know, there's a Chaos Cultist, there's Imperial Guard, there's various Tyranid organisms as well. I even had a custom Patriarch, and then I was up against Sisters of Battle and Imperial Guard, and there were some really interesting characters created, and we had interesting scenic elements. So I'd have to say probably Utgard Infestation. Fate of Fayoum, though, since it was the first that we did, I think we did a pretty good job on that one, considering that I didn't really know what I was doing, and I had some concepts in my mind that I've totally gotten rid of because I know they now don't really work in making these narrative campaigns. But still, it created some really good memories, and because it was our first and we saw the reaction, that's created a good positive feeling in me towards that campaign. So those ones are probably up there. It's not that I didn't like the other ones, like the Rise of the Blood Reaver or the Stagabog's Greed and all of that, but if you're asking for favorites, those are probably it. And I'm hoping that every time I make a new one, it'll become my new favorite, because I will hopefully have learned from old ones and be able to apply those techniques and get better at making them. Secondly, I recently started my own map-based campaign with a group of friends, 40kffo.blogspot.co.uk for those interested. To try and get the players a bit more invested in their warlord in the campaign, I'm doing fluff-based summaries at the end of every turn. Are you considering doing something like this for Warzone Apothis, or if you were to do it again? Maybe the controlling player of each faction could do their own story time. Anyway, thanks for your time. We can talk more. I think we have some more questions about Warzone Apothis. Yeah, the next person asked questions about how I'm going to change it, so I'm gonna hold off talking about all of that right until that question. But obviously that's not what we're doing with Warzone Apothis. By the time you're watching this, we've released 40-something episodes, I think. I think that we've finished around episode 64, and we're probably going to stop filming there, and then we're going to film the finales. So there's a lot less story in Warzone Apothis. But to answer your question, would it be something that I would do or consider doing if I were to do it again? It's not so much about the warlords. See, that's the thing. You have to be careful about putting too much emphasis on a certain character, because then he might die, but then you'll want to not make him die, and so it just doesn't work. You have to kind of let characters grow organically. If I were doing it with a group of friends, I wouldn't focus a huge amount on the fluff, to be honest. I would actually run it a lot like Warzone Apothis, but actually have some sort of point system as well, that they get points for winning games. And that's because with a group of friends, it's okay if there's not tons and tons of story. You can still come up with story elements, obviously. But you're going to have people coming in and out of it as well. And so I'd kind of have it more loose. And that was kind of the idea with the Warzone Apothis. It was the campaign that you could run in your club kind of thing. But, obviously there's things that we could improve there. Anyways, thanks for your time, Gordy. P.S. If I didn't live in England, I'd totally snap up that web dev job. Yeah, we're still looking for it, although we have some candidates that we've interviewed, and I think we may have found one, but that position's still open. Flaming Walnut. Since the topic is narrative campaigns, I figured I definitely would love to join in. First, what changes would you make if you were to run another Apothis campaign? I found that the disparity in skill and casual level combined with so many planets to fight on that the focus of the campaign was all over the place. But other than that, I really do love the campaign. It adds an extra layer of fun to the battle reports, to the point that the rest of the battle reports seem almost bland in comparison. Even in small games, I love some sort of narrative or drive to it, making it feel more like it's part of the world instead of just a game of miniatures. I agree, by the way. If I were to do Apothis again, and I doubt that I will, And I know some people will be disappointed by that, but that just, if we hadn't done Apophis, you would have had a couple other narrative campaigns come out during the summer. So, it doesn't mean that we're not going to do narrative campaigns. It just means we wouldn't do it like that. If I were to do it again, I would slow down the pace. I don't know if it's really a function of how many planets there were, or how many tiles. If I were to, I would probably try to have it in less battle reports. So yeah, I would have less tiles. I don't think that was a problem though. We could have had it just on one planet, and you could still have people focusing on the wrong things. Is it because people came in and played and they didn't necessarily play well? Not necessarily, because that could have gone both ways. Because we've had people come in who just destroy us, and other people who come in that don't play as well. It just so happened that certain factions got luckier than others with the way that the matchups kind of went. I think what people really, really wanted to see in Warzone Apophis, and they didn't get, was of course the story element, which I never really intended to do a lot of. It was meant to be more loose story and kind of more people come in and all of that. But because of the pace that we had, we were filming so many of them. And that's something that overall I'm changing as a business, is kind of the pace that we film battle reports, because it got a little frantic, and so I just wasn't able to keep up with it. So we did our round recaps and things like that, but I was hoping to throw some story elements into it or do some special missions throughout, but we just got so booked that I couldn't. So if I were to do it again, I would definitely slow it down, so we're only filming so many per week, and so we'd have a space to actually do special missions and also to be able to add story elements to it, and also focus more on giving each mission more of a story, because there was some definite opportunities there. Like early on, Eldar were in like several battle reports in a row, so they fought for AdMech every time. So the question is why would they fight for AdMech? We actually came up with some ideas as to what was going on and why they were helping there. And at another point, both Dark Angels and Grey Knights fought against the AdMech faction. And I'm like, well, that kind of makes sense, because the AdMech are toying with Xenos technology. So if an Inquisitor got wind of that, then maybe he would, want to kind of investigate that. So the Grey Knights in particular would be coming after that. So the AdMech faction is all of a sudden not like, oh, so clean and the good guy. So there were opportunities, but because of the pacing of how I filmed it, we just weren't able to, just didn't have the energy, never mind the time to try to add in all those story elements. You have to understand that when I make narrative campaigns, doing the story part of it is very taxing. It's a lot of work. It's not necessarily a lot of hours of work, but it's a lot of brain power to sit down and to write for a few hours. Even the story times that are only 5-10 minutes long, those take a long time to kind of write and figure out and put together and think about. It's between like sitting down with whoever I played against and us coming up with ideas and then actually writing it out. There's a lot of mental energy that goes into that. And so doing that on a huge scale because a typical narrative campaign has 12 battle reports, so it has 6 weeks of dual battle reports. And this one is going to have close to 70 by the time we're finished. And that's equivalent of almost 6 narrative campaigns. And so if I had to put in that much story time, but in a spacing of about 2 to 3 months, which typically takes me a couple months to do one narrative campaign. Just think about the amount of work that is. And I think that's the mistake that we kind of made. But the thing is, I wanted there to be lots of battle reports. Like I was thinking there'd be like 100 of them. But by the time we hit like 50, I saw that, we've kind of reached some sort of conclusion that we can kind of wrap it up. But I wanted there to be lots of battle reports, because that was the original thing, but people were so disappointed by how little story there was that I realized it's not really what people are looking for. That's something they can do at their club, but I do realize that some people disagree. They'll say, though, I loved Warzone Apophis the way it was. I liked that each battle kind of had some sort of importance and a little bit of narrative to it, and it made the battle reports more interesting, and I agree with that. And maybe there's room for this to become something that we do for our regular campaigns. Maybe we can kind of change the scaling of it, make it even larger scale, and so that people who want to come in and contribute to the narrative overall could do that. And instead of having such hard and fast rules for the planets, we can kind of develop some sort of other thing. And there's something that's coming to my brain right now that I'm starting to think maybe this is not a bad idea, so that most of our battle reports have some sort of narrative to them. But I'll have to kind of see what I think about that, because there's some ideas popping in my mind right now, even as I speak. So yeah. Second question from Flaming Walnut. If I may, what do you think is the perfect scale for a campaign? Now that you've done an entire sector, as well as the usual planets, which do you like most for a narrative campaign? And would you consider an even smaller setting, like just a city or even a single spaceship? Would love to see a Necromunda-style campaign where factions fight to control a city or ship, perhaps even used as a campaign within campaign to increase a narrative. Whoever controls the ship determines major plot points of the next campaign. That's an excellent question. I've covered some elements of it. What do I think is the perfect scale? I think I've talked about that too, but I want to address that just a little more in detail. I don't think there is a perfect scale. I think you can do any scale. I think the sector, I don't think it's had anything to do with scale, because if you look at it, we could have just said that was 2 systems worth of planets. Like, it's kind of arbitrary. It's very arbitrary. All the games that we played, we could have said they're all just 1 planet. Like, it's totally possible. A planet is rather large. Like, if you think about our planet here, now I know that we're not fighting with spaceships and larger weapons and all that, but you think about how many countries there are on our planet, just our 1 planet. And within those countries, all the different armies there are, and all the wars that are going on right now, and all those small fights, and the larger fights, and the wars that we have had. Like, we've had world wars, which, while they affected global economy and global, like the entire world, it wasn't fought in the entire world. It was actually fought in a very small percentage of the world when you compare it to the entire landmass. And even though the number of casualties in these world wars, which were rather, they were high, don't get me wrong, but when you look at it as a percentage of the population, it's still a small percentage. Whereas, you know, if you think about like hive worlds, for example, for 40K, those can have countless billions of people. Like each hive city can have billions of people, and we have several billion people on our entire planet. So
I think Russia would have a disagreement with that statement.
Which one?
Unknown, like the numbers, population not being that effective, because they don't know how many they lost in the Second World War. It's huge.
Okay, well, still, even if it was, and don't get me wrong, like it's every person lost is a tragedy. I'm not trying to minimize, but even if it was 1 billion people, even 1 billion people out of 6 billion is still, that's what, 15%? That's not, don't get me wrong, that's catastrophically huge, and that would be absolutely awful. All I'm trying to say though is scaling, like things don't have to be big before they are significant. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. And so, yeah, so regardless of what the numbers are, and I'm not a history buff, so I really don't even know what all the numbers are, but all I know is that scaling can be anywhere. We could do an entire campaign in the underbelly of a hive world, and that's it. And they could actually be large-scale conflicts, because like I said, a hive world has billions of people. So there could be large conflicts just there. Or it could be planet-wide, or it could be system-wide, or it could just be on a moon, or in a spaceship, or on a Space Hulk, or anything else. Now, the advantage of doing a campaign on a world is that you have more than 1 setting. So you could fight underground, above ground, in a city, out in the plains, whatever happens to be. And then the advantage of doing a campaign like Wars on Apophis is that you have different kinds of planets, so you have even more variety of settings. But I still don't think there's going to be a perfect scale. I think it just depends on what you feel like doing. I think in all cases, though, it's important that you focus on character development and on some interesting story. And that's really the key points. Everything else is kind of secondary. All the battles, all the battle reports are actually just there to help you develop the characters in the story, and that's what makes it interesting. It's kind of like action in a movie. Sure, you have movies that are just action, their story is pretty bad, and those can be enjoyable. But the truly good movies are ones that combine, well, and it doesn't even have to be an action movie. I'm just using action as an example. Whether it's special effects or action or high budget this or whatever. The truly good, let's say the truly good action movies will be the ones that have really cool action sequences and an interesting story, and probably most importantly, interesting characters with people and good actors to play those characters to make them interesting. So that's why Age of Ultron was so awesome. And realism is not one of the prerequisites, otherwise Avengers would not be so liked. Anyways, hope that answers your question there. Either way, says Flaming Walnut, keep up the good work. You honestly know openness is a great asset in the face of Games Workshop's, well, opposite stance. Best of luck in the future. Always eager to see more narrative structured wargaming. Gerard Duror. Narrative question. How would you go about increasing the points cost of a character who is doing well in a campaign so you could give him the extra rules like preferred enemy or hatred? Those things, there's one or two ways you can do it. One, you can find a counts as kind of thing. Like, for example, Khrushchev, after the campaign was over, we're like, he's going to count as Commissar Yarrick. We're going to use Yarrick's rules. But during the campaign, we would actually just give him upgrades that were available to the Commissar and just pay the points for it. But let's say you're going to give him upgrades that aren't available. You don't even necessarily have to incorporate those into your points. Like, let's face it, if you take 2,000 points of something and pit it against 2,000 points of something else, it's not balanced. It is never 100% balanced. And so if you give one side a few upgrades, that's not going to unbalance it more. Heck, it might actually balance it because maybe this one was the one that was actually stronger. Points values, despite what people think, do not balance the game. And so they're a good estimate, but they're never anywhere near. Like, how many games have you played where it's been very one-sided and yet both sides have the same number of points? And even when you go to analyze it, those one-sided games, the side that just beat the snot out of the other side may have only done it with a small percentage of their army. There might have just been, like, I've played games. I remember playing a chaos game with a Tzeentch summoning army where he had the, I think, double or triple Demon Prince, and then there was like tons and tons of summoning in the back. And it felt like the summoning was winning him the game. But then when I analyzed it afterwards, I realized that all that time he spent summoning and creating new models, those didn't do anything. And it was just the 2 or 3 Demon Princes actually just hacked through my entire army. And so when you look at, it was a very one-sided game, and he could have actually just dropped all the stuff in the back and still won the whole game. He could have had almost half the number of points as me and still would have slaughtered my army. So points do not balance the game. They just kind of give us some sort of system so we can kind of feel like it's fair, even though it's really not. And so when you're talking about like adding points to a guy because he gave preferred enemy or hatred, I'll tell you that we didn't really do that for, like, Helen, for example. She gained special rules as we went along. We didn't pay points for those. It just didn't matter. We're just like, whatever. It's just small little things here. They could make a difference. Don't get me wrong. It's just adding points to it doesn't necessarily give us any sense of balance. So I wouldn't. If you're playing with friends, though, they might feel cheated if you're getting these upgrades and not getting it. So in that case, try to find some sort of equivalent in your codex, hold on a second. Let me just silence my phone. Yeah, just find some sort of equivalent war gear upgrade that you can give them that gives them something similar or gives them the same thing, and just do it that way. But we don't really worry about it in our narrative campaigns that much. Sand Tiger, narrative campaign question. How do you decide on names, classes, and abilities of customized characters in your campaigns? Names is the hardest one. I look up random name generators, honestly, and I just kind of go through them until I find something acceptable. Or I try to get my opponent to name their own stuff to save me the headache of having to do it. Classes, we don't do classes. Abilities, they all just fall, if you think about it, think about the characters that are most interesting in the campaigns. Heck, pretty much all the characters are just something from a codex. Commissar Khrushchev is just a commissar, a Lord Commissar, but a commissar at that. The Helen was just a sergeant in a Battle Sister squad, and eventually we started using Canoness rules for her. Who else we got? We got Khnum. He was just an overlord. He just used the rules for an overlord. And then you got, like, in the mini Wargaming Space Marine chapter, you've got Davicus and Matthias. Matthias used Tigurius's rules. Davicus uses Vulcan's rules. So that's all we really did. And then we might give them some upgrades or something, but we would just pick models from, with the exception of the Patriarch from Utgard Infestation, I actually created custom rules for that. But even points cost wise, I tried to base it on the Broodlord and then give him upgrades and kind of try to make his points make sense for that. So yeah, the hardest part is names. Coming up with names. I hate coming up with names. Like, I really, really hate coming up with names. It's my least favorite part of making narrative campaigns. So once I have a name, it's fine. But it's a very essential part to writing. You need to have the names of stuff so that you feel like there's something there. But that is definitely the hardest part for me. Jabul. Narrative campaigns question. My favorite memories of playing Warhammer Fantasy Battle when I was a lad were playing Mighty Empire Tiles, map-based campaigns, where armies build and march, meet in battle, all units and characters were named, and heroes in the story emerged. I tried a couple times to reproduce the same feeling with map-based 40k campaigns, but have never succeeded. Once it was at a club of which I was a bit of a newbie and an outsider, and not all participants got it and really got involved. That's your biggest problem. That's the hard part. Another was because we played too infrequently and didn't really give enough of ourselves to developing the character of the campaign or the 28mm participants. How would you run such a campaign? Key in such a campaign is armies moving around, so if one chap fought in one location, they couldn't just turn up in another without traveling there somehow. And the ability for individuals to advance from rank and file up without that getting overbearing. The easiest way to do all of that is to have a GM, to have a games master who everybody buys into, allowing them to have the power to kind of determine story and character development and all that. An easier way than that, even, so I guess that wasn't the easiest way, is to not have character development in the sense that they level up, but that you just kind of make a new model for them because it's really interesting. And then you give them different upgrades to kind of match what they are, or you make them count as something. So you're still paying the right amount of points for it. And like I said, this is because you're playing amongst your friends. You might think, well, that's strange that he said, well, points don't matter. But when you're playing amongst your friends, they might feel cheated. Whereas when I'm playing against somebody else, we talk together and we come up with what we're doing. So both sides kind of participate in that. But I agree that the map-based fantasy would be easier because it just makes more sense that they don't have ways to teleport places. Now, like obviously there's magic and stuff that you could use, and that could be an element of it. But 40K, things showing up in another place is not so crazy because they can just jump inside their transports and fly across. Like, it really doesn't take that long. But fantasy kind of, it gives itself more to a tile-based campaign and actually tracking where the armies are. And that's really cool. I like that concept. It's a really neat concept to kind of track the army, or at least track points values. Because in reality, your army could go there, but they could recruit from nearby places, or they could have deserters, and so the army composition could change. But for 40K, I would try to keep it a little more abstract. I wouldn't try to have it where you're marching from place to place, because in 40K, there is marching, don't get me wrong. Like, you're reading the Gaunt's Ghost books and you know that they're marching. They land in some sort of landing zone and then they march there, which never made any sense to me, but they do it. So there is that kind of troop movement, and you could try to track it if you want, but since things can kind of fly and get places fast, or teleport, or webways, or whatever else you can come up with, or tunnel, or anything else, you have to have a bit more abstraction to where the armies could be. You can still keep track of the armies themselves, maybe make a certain number of tiles they're allowed to move. Character development, I would be careful about. Like, if you want a rank and file guy to advance, give him a name and then make him count as something else. Make him count as a commander or a captain rather than the champion that he was. Like, just change what he is and just call him the same thing. That's what I would do. I'd stick to the models that are provided, the rules that are provided for those reasons. Mr. Pinky Piggy, make a bat rap narrative campaign. Oh, that would be awful. Yeah, that was a good laugh. That's Chris's enthusiasm. He went, if you couldn't hear that over the microphone. Fantastic Eric. Hiya, Matt. Is it possible to make a narrative for Warhammer Fantasy? The reason for asking is that 40K has many worlds and star systems. Fantasy has one world. If you can, could you make an example? Thanks a lot. Love and mini wargaming, Eric. Yeah, totally. Both with the 8th edition fantasy and 9th edition fantasy. Sorry, I know somebody's going to get mad at me saying that. Okay, 8th edition fantasy and Age of Sigmar. I think Age of Sigmar actually lends itself more to narrative campaigns because it's a skirmish-based thing. So, because the problem with fantasy was that everything had to be big fights. And I know you can scale it down, but the game doesn't really scale down. The game really needs minimum 1,500 to 2,000 points to make sense. And that's fine if your narrative campaigns are always about big armies clashing against big armies. But I guess you could throw in like the Mordheim special rules to make the smaller scale stuff. But Age of Sigmar kind of, we still have a lot. I don't want to have a big discussion about Age of Sigmar yet because I want to keep waiting and to see what else they're going to come out with for that before I really make any judgment calls. But I really see the potential for Age of Sigmar to be really good at narrative campaigns because it really focuses more on skirmishes. So, and kind of the setting has changed. The setting is still fuzzy in my mind. I'm still learning more about it, trying to see what it looks like, what it feels like, what kind of stories would be there. In the old fantasy, any story was fine. Basically any story I come up with 40K, you could probably do in fantasy to some degree, because it's just the typical stories. Army A is going after Army B, and then you have some characters, and you have some infiltrating and spying. You've got some sort of magical event or a chaotic psyker who's trying to end the world, or the continent, or the city, or the village, or the sewers, whatever it happens to be. You can really fit any story you want in there. And it's a fantasy. There's a bajillion stories out there. I never create a story from scratch. I always get ideas from other things and then kind of mold that into my own story. So, which is probably what everybody does, but some won't admit that. JPederdus 14. Hey Matt, what do you find is the hardest thing about writing a narrative campaign? Thanks for everything you guys do, and sorry for my unpronounceable username. Glad you admit that. The hardest thing about writing a narrative campaign, besides coming up with names for stuff, is actually doing the battle reports. They are hard to do, because I want them to go a certain way. It's not necessarily that I want a certain side to win, although sometimes I do, but it's more I just want them to be interesting. Now, when I do regular battle reports, I want them to be interesting, and I get disappointed when they're one-sided or just kind of bland. But it doesn't bother me that much. It's like, well, we put out tons of battle reports, and so some of them are going to be bland, some of them are going to be exciting. But the narrative campaigns, I feel like every mission needs to be awesome. And that's a lot of pressure. So actually filming the battle reports is very, and something I got to kind of change my thought process on. But they're very hard on my psyche, because I'm watching the dice, and the dice just screw me over so much. If I make an important character, you could bet that the dice will kill that character. And so I've got to be more willing to let go of certain things and kind of let it happen more organically. Or just sometimes we'll set it up, we think we've made a really cool, fair scenario, and one side will just trounce the other. And that's hard, because you want them to be interesting. People get really invested in these, more so than our normal battle reports, and so you'll hear about it more when they don't like it. And so, we get a lot of vault signups from these when they're actually good. So I can see the difference between when a game is well received, we see more vault signups, and then the next week that mission wasn't as good, we see less vault signups that week. Like there's an obvious oh man, what's the word? Correlation, but that's not it. Proportion. Inversely proportionate, and it's proportion. Yeah, I guess correlation. Correlation works. So there's an obvious correlation between how well we did with creating that particular mission and how many people sign up for the vault. And so that's kind of mentally draining, because here I am playing the game, and I've created this scenario, and I've helped. We've both worked together to create these armies. So there's a lot more pressure, because if it fails, I know people are going to be like, you cheated because you made your guys too strong, or I can't believe you allowed them to charge out of that thing. Why don't you follow the regular rules? Like, people get really angry especially if I win and it's like unbalanced. It's even worse. I'm the biggest cheater in the world, and I'm just trying to win every battle report in these narrative campaigns. Like that's what I really care about. And so they get on my case more about that. And I know there's still lots of positive, and I have to look at how many vault members sign up, but there's still a lot of pressure to create something that's really good. I kind of can empathize a little bit with writers and producers and directors of movies, because they don't even get the feedback mid-movie like we do. Like we make some missions and put them out, and maybe we can change course partway through based on feedback. But they spend tons of money, make an entire movie, and then put it out. And that's it. That's all they can do. There's no control they have at that point. So I can see how there's a lot of pressure. And no movie is perfectly received. So there's always going to be lots of negativity. The more popular the movie, the more negativity it'll have. Even if it gets rated 80 or 90% Rotten Tomatoes, it doesn't matter, because those critics will be loud and mean and won't consider the fact that the director and actors and all the other people are real human beings. It doesn't matter how much money they have, they still have emotions like everybody else, and can be hurt by that and can get discouraged by that. And so, yeah, so there's a lot of pressure there. So I'd say, would be the hardest part. Writing is hard, coming up with names is hard, but actually playing the game can be hard because I want, and unless the game turns out perfectly, in which case it's really exciting. But it's still, I would say that's the hardest part. All right, how are we doing for time? We got about 5 more minutes and a few more questions, so it looks like we'll have time for a vault segment as well. Miso. Okay, some narrative campaign questions. How have you come up with the major storylines for what you think were the best campaigns? What are your main story influences from film, TV, literature? And what have you learned about storytelling so far? I would say, well, obviously, I get ideas for stories everywhere, movies, TV, books, but I have to say that probably the biggest influence of a lot of the stories has been reading 40K novels. Like the Utgard Infestation, maybe it was Storms of Ixia. I think it was Storms of Ixia. I had just read some of the Gaunt's Ghosts novels, so all of a sudden in my mind the Imperial Guard went from being bland to being very interesting, because if you read the Gaunt's Ghosts omnibus and some of the other novels there, they make the Imperial Guard actually really cool. They don't make them superhuman. Like somehow that band of Gaunt's Ghosts mostly survives, which in 40K is like, good luck trying to do that in a narrative campaign. Have a whole group of guys survive. Yeah, right. Especially when they're just Imperial Guardsmen. It's like, this one's really good, so he's going to be Ballistic Skill 4, and he's still Toughness 3 and will die as soon as something looks at him. But anyway, they still made it really cool, like these just basic stories of Imperial Guardsmen fighting chaos or who knows what else. But they just gave so much story to what was going on, and so much character, and so much infighting, and so much, all this stuff that I was just like, yeah, Imperial Guard are really cool. And I kind of tried to incorporate those kind of elements. I can't do it to the same detail as a book, obviously, but I still can get influenced by it. Now, the actual storylines, they always start off with some influence from somewhere. Like a really good place to get ideas is actually, let's say I wanted to make a Dark Angels campaign. What I would do first is I'd open up the Dark Angels Codex and I would just read all the fluff parts, and especially the part that has the timeline. And the timeline ones are where they basically give you like a date and like a 1-paragraph summary of some major event that happened. Those are awesome for ideas, because you just read that 1 paragraph and you're like, ooh, I like this concept in there. But it doesn't have all the details, which is good, because you need to come up with the details, otherwise you're just fully copying another story. And you take that and you develop a story from it. And maybe by the time you actually go and start doing your campaign, you're nowhere near what that story was to begin with, but it gave you a kind of a springboard to start from. I'd say pretty much every campaign has had some sort of springboard like that. And then maybe it's got developed so much that it's not even recognizable where it started, and it's pulled from so many different influences that you can't really tell. So I would say if you're looking for ideas for stories, the codexes are a great place to start, especially like I said, the timeline parts, or just those little side boxes where they just tell you a little thing. And then of course the 40K novels, obviously there's a lot of bad ones, but there's several that are just kind of give you a glimpse into how cool the 40K universe can be and how intricate the plots can be. And I really enjoy that aspect of it. So yeah, so all sorts of that kind of stuff. And Miso has another question. Given you and Dave sometimes take sabbaticals, would you ever consider taking a sabbatical to write a short novel based on a narrative campaign in a different universe, of course? If you were to try and write a novel, what style and genre do you think would it be for? Sci-fi, fantasy, heroic, anti-heroic, mystery, standalone novel, or would you try to create a big world, a la Conan, Lord of the Rings, etc.? Which author or story would you most like to try and emulate? That's like 5 questions. I haven't actually ever taken a sabbatical. Like Dave's taking a bit of time off right now because his brother passed, but it's not to write a story or something. It's just to kind of take it easy. He's been working on the studios and all of that and getting them constructed. If I were to take a sabbatical, assuming by that meaning a good chunk of time off, I've kind of always had a desire to author a book, but at the same time I don't think I really have the patience for it. I don't think I could actually write a book, and I think I'd get bored too quickly. So no, I don't think I'd write a book. But if I were to write a book, I think the sci-fi genre would be the most interesting to me. And other than that, I really couldn't tell you much more. But yeah. One more question. Death Jester 30. Hey Matt, how long does it take you to develop a narrative campaign before any dice are thrown? And is it just you who works on them, or do you get your opposition to help contribute as well? Thanks for all the content. It's different for every campaign. Some of them, the earlier ones, I kind of worked on by myself. But like the one that I'm working on right now, I had a story meeting with pretty much all the employees, recorded it too, and it'll come out as a behind the scenes thing after the campaign is done. And so I basically pitched what I had so far, and then everybody kind of threw in their own ideas. And so I like to sit down with people and talk about ideas. That's where I get my best ideas from, is actually talking it out with somebody. And how much work before we actually do one? I'd have to tell you a number of hours. I don't know. Maybe, I'm trying to think how many hours I've already put into this one that I'm about to do. Maybe like 2 or 3 days of work, so 15 to 20 hours before we actually start one. Warzone Apothis, I actually spent like 2 weeks, but that's because there's a lot of other stuff to do as well. So not tons of time, but a good amount of time to kind of prep it and get ready for it as well. A lot of time is spent on research, reading, and getting ideas. So it's hard to quantify how much time that is because it's like done in little chunks here and there. Anyways, that's all the questions I have time for the sit and talk. I'll continue this though. There's still more questions about narrative campaigns, and I'm going to continue it in the Vault segment, which is at the link in the video description below, along with the links for all the other stuff too. Don't forget to click and suggest topics and vote on topics at the link below. Leave comments and questions about rules for 40K in the comment section below. And if you're not a Vault member, you can still click on the Sit and Vault and get a free 7-day trial and get instant access to that, as well as thousands of other videos. So go ahead and click that. Thanks for watching, and happy wargaming.